We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stuff. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube and wherever you're listening to your podcast. We're not live, but you're listening to us. And here we are, Sam, continuing our season previews. It's the AFC and NFC West today.
Back in the studio.
We're back in the studio, back from our road trip to Nashville. Did some stuff, ate some food, saw some football. Talked about it a little bit on yesterday's podcast.
Ate some hot chicken. Do you have hot chicken?
I've had hot chicken. I did not have the hot chicken that you had or the type that you've had.
Yeah. Hattie B's was recommended to us as the place we had to go. I just say, you go in there and they've got like a scale of heat. You're like, well, I'm not going to go to the top one. That's probably silly. I'll go one down from the top one. I like hot stuff. So I got damn hot, I think was its description, which I later discovered in small print next to damn hot is written the term enthusiast only. I can understand that having sampled it. It was, in fact, damn hot, which wasn't that unpleasant going in. It was more unpleasant coming out the next morning.
That's great. That's fantastic. Really glad we kicked off the podcast with that, Sam.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to get through. We've got 15 minutes per team.
Right? And news, yeah.
And we do have some news. Some of it relates to the NFC West and the Cardinals. They did just trade, as we went live, they just traded Isaiah Simmons to the New York Giants
and
for a
then
7th round pick.
There's the news yesterday that Trey Lance is the number 3.
That's news that will be incorporated into the NFC West discussion. And then there's other news.
Yep.
I never thought I'd say it. Future Hall of Famer Corey Davis has retired.
He has. So are you, at this point, this is a crossroads, it's a fork in the road. Are you going to go down the road of saying, looks like I got that one wrong? Or are you aware that the clock has just started, 5 years you have to construct a Hall of Fame case for the great Corey Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little torn that Corey has to share the stage with Tom Brady in 5 years in Canton. Yeah, and not Ben.
But maybe that'll help you. Maybe that'll help. You can get something in on the radar while everyone's focusing on Tom.
We'll sneak Corey in.
Right.
He did finish just 717 receptions short of my prediction of 1,000 career receptions.
Yeah. 273 receptions, 3,879 yards, and 17 touchdowns. It's difficult to construct a Hall of Fame case.
4 or 5 playoff touchdowns in there, I believe.
True. I mean, that's a starting point, right?
Right. You might use the playoff stats, which also aren't great. But, I loved Corey Davis.
Yeah.
And it was a running gag here on the show because I had to make a bold prediction for that 2017 draft, and I predicted 1,000 catches for Corey Davis in a future Hall of Fame career.
I mean, if you add his Western Michigan years in there, 4 of them, you get to about halfway towards where you thought he would end up.
There we go. We could do that. We could add Western Michigan into his Hall of Fame career. All right, well, Corey Davis retires. We might have more on that later, but I was a little sad. I also knew, he was a wide receiver too for the majority of his career, and he was solid. But that's it. He's moving on.
Weird timing, no?
Just made his $50 million. I think he just wanted to move on.
All right.
sometimes you got to learn new skills. And as a parent, you've had to learn so many new skills to provide for your family. How to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for every even the pickiest eater, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies plus other financial solutions all in one easy online hub. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You can go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET, fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, man, let's start in the NFC. Is that okay?
Sure.
NFC West, start with the Arizona Cardinals, who just traded Isaiah Simmons. So we're going team by team here, as we've done on previous shows, previewing the year. Is there any team heading into the season with lower expectations than the Arizona Cardinals?
Well, somebody pointed out to me this morning on the radio that Arizona, I think, might be the only team in the NFL now that we don't have a confirmed Week 1 starter at quarterback for. Right?
Yeah.
Everyone else is.
It's up in the air still. Colt McCoy and Clayton Tune.
Yeah, everybody else I think is either determined or almost certainly determined. I don't think the Texans have they named Stroud officially, but it's going to be Stroud, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they've named him, but
right.
He's been the starter in the preseason.
So
we
everybody,
that's the case.
It's either official for everybody or might as well be official. The Cardinals is the one where I think that's still a battle between Colt McCoy and Clayton Tune, with Kyler Murray on the shelf.
Yeah, it would be Kyler Murray, obviously, but he's hurt, and Clayton Tune, 5th-round pick. Okay, grade so far in the preseason, but yeah, it's between Clayton Tune and Colt McCoy. I mean, the reality for the Cardinals here in offseason where they've traded DeAndre Hopkins, they just traded Isaiah Simmons after turning down his 5th-year option. We see last year they were 4-13, projected for 6.6 wins. I'm a little surprised it's even that high, the PFF projection. But it already looks like, look, the Cardinals, they were wheeling and dealing at draft time. They've got 2 first-round picks next year, of course, their own, plus the Houston Texans. It's a transitional year for Arizona, mostly because Kyler Murray's hurt. Because he got hurt in December last year, and we don't know when he's going to be back. In addition to just parts of the roster being in transition, the front 7 is just full of unknowns, including Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck. So he's in there. He's a known. But he's filled with,
we know the
next to all unknowns. So, yeah, it's tough to project Arizona for more than just a few wins. But that's okay. You just got to know what you're getting into if you're a Cardinals fan, right?
Yeah, it's fairly rough looking in a lot of places, this roster. Even where they have either name recognition or some theoretical strength, it's very young. Like that receiving core, top to bottom, it's not bad. Marquise Brown, the sort of one, alpha wide receiver. Michael Wilson, the Stanford rookie, looks like he's going to be the other starter. I think he's a really potentially impressive player, even right out of the gate. Rondale Moore is now their kind of primary slot guy. Greg Dortch behind him has shown some ability. Trey McBride at tight end is somebody that had insane potential coming out, was a slow starter as a rookie. Zach Ertz is now back. And the backfield, James Conner, that's a good group. It may be young and unproven, but kind of like if you like Green Bay's, I think there's reason to like this group as well. The problem is Kyler Murray, the quarterback that's supposed to be getting them the ball, is hurt at the moment, and the options outside of that are Colt McCoy or a low-round rookie in Clayton Tune, and the offensive line might not be great because it's a group of tackles and then problems inside.
Yeah, I'm with you on the group of playmakers there that you laid out and some of the intrigue there. The offensive line situation that you're talking about, we've said a bunch of times on the podcast here. DJ Humphries is locked in as the left tackle, making about $17 million a year. They just draft Paris Johnson at number 6 overall. He's slated probably to play right tackle this year. They brought Kelvin Beachum back, who's been a very solid right tackle. He's that guy, that tackle that I was telling every team to sign back during free agency if you want to get production on the cheap. Beachum slated to be a backup, and then the great Josh Jones, who had an excellent season last year as they moved him back to tackle. So Arizona does have plenty of tackles. Josh Jones has struggled at guard, so he's probably not going to kick back inside. Beachum is a tackle only. Right now, Yeldy Froholt, unproven center. Will Hernandez coming off his best season. Elijah Wilkinson probably slated to play guard. It's not a great offensive line, but certainly the strength is at tackle. As of right now, Josh Jones still on the team. I don't even know if Arizona's shopping him. It just seems like he's got 1 year left on his deal, and he was playing good football last year at left tackle, this year at left and right tackle in the preseason. Kelvin Beachum, for some of those tackle-needy teams around the league, for Arizona, who should just continue to accumulate draft picks, it kind of makes sense to maybe shop those guys.
Yeah, I mean...
that was a weird way to end the sentence.
Right.
It was a cliffhanger finish to the sentence. I don't normally do that, but I did, but I was throwing it back to you.
I got that at the end.
Okay, cool.
A bit late, long enough that maybe there was
I just wanted to
explain.
I wanted to explain the awkward pause. That was completely my fault.
Yeah. They have essentially 4 capable starting tackles right now, theoretically, assuming Paris Johnson, the rookie, can come in and be okay. So, obviously, there's only 2 spots for those guys. So you either carry 2 of them as backups, which is everyone wants a swing tackle. Most people don't want 2. So it's a very strange spot. I would imagine they would be trying to trade Josh Jones. I can't really understand why that hasn't happened yet already, given what he's shown when he's been playing left tackle and the potential need at left tackle for certain teams out there. But as of yet, that's where the strength of this offensive line lies, and it should be pretty good on the bookends, on the tackles. It's the interior that looks problematic, which is probably a bigger issue for Arizona than it would be for other teams, because if Kyler Murray is your quarterback, ideally you would like the interior as strong as humanly possible. He doesn't necessarily work the middle of the field particularly well anyway, and that's not going to be improved by having, weak links. If your 3 interior players were all pros, maybe his working the middle of the field might improve a little bit. It's certainly likely to move the needle. But then you get offense is going to be, who knows what it'll look like, because we don't even know who the starting quarterback will be, but probably not great. And then the defense is where on paper it looks really rough.
Yeah, so again, somebody go trade for Josh Jones. Go get him. Let's talk defense now for Arizona. Last year at this time, it was kind of J.J. Watt and friends. Watt has since retired, and his friends are still young and unproven. So you've got a lot of L.J. Collier, Jonathan Ledbetter, Leki Fotu, Carlos Watkins, Rashard Lawrence. No real established names there. They're all guys that have been rotational players throughout their career. Linebackers, kind of the same thing. The other interesting move at linebacker is Zaven Collins, the former first-round pick, a linebacker who's moving to edge rusher. I try to reiterate this so many times. No, even though a 3-4 outside linebacker is called a linebacker, they're not a linebacker. They're a pass rusher. They have edge. That's why we started edge defender here, right? It's a 3-4 rush backer and a 4-3 defensive end. Essentially have the same role. So moving a player from off-ball linebacker to a pass rush role, where you have to go win one-on-one. It's not blitzes. You have to go win one-on-one. It is a rare move. Micah Parsons has done it. But you could probably argue maybe Micah Parsons was out of position playing linebacker originally. Right. Zaven Collins has an edge defender body type. I have no idea if you can rely on him as a 30 pass rush a game type of guy. But it's Zaven Collins and I kind of like some of the young players. Cameron Thomas played well in limited time last year. Myjai Sanders, BJ Ojolari comes in. But on these preview shows every year, when you have a team that's clearly rebuilding, what I say is, this year's about finding the guys that are part of the rebuild. So edge defender is something I'll be watching for Arizona. Does Zaven Collins take to the new role? Does it Cameron Thomas, Myjai Sanders, BJ Ojolari? Which of those guys steps up and is now Arizona saying, okay, these are the guys we can trust going forward as we start to rebuild this roster?
The concerning thing about Zaven Collins being moved to the edge is he's never really played there before. He's even when he rushed the passer, he didn't do that particularly often in college. He didn't blitz that often. This is not a guy who's shown, if you were taking a Dante Hightower, say, a guy who's shown a fairly extensive history of winning as a pass rusher, albeit in different circumstances, largely on the blitz against backs or tight ends or coming up the middle, those kinds of things, you could at least, there's a fairly large body of work to say this could project to the edge. Zaven Collins really hasn't done that much at all at any level. So it's a massive projection to say, well, just because he looks like he's an edge rusher, we can move him there and he'll be good at that. Like, edge rushing, there's a technique to it. There's skill involved. Like, we don't know that he can do any of that yet. And this is, okay, it's a different regime doing it, but Arizona now has this history in recent years of taking unusual body types on defense and trying to shoehorn them into the position that it looks like they should play because of their body type, instead of just taking the player and asking, what does he do really well right now, regardless of what he looks like, and getting him to do that. And so Zaven Collins is like a 260-pound off-the-ball linebacker. But because he's 260 pounds and looks like an edge rusher, we're now going to move him to the edge. Hassan Reddick was like a 240-pound edge rusher, but because he looked like an off-the-ball linebacker, we tried to move him off the ball, and he was bad at that before eventually putting him back where he belonged. Isaiah Simmons was a 245-pound, 250-pound defensive back, but because he looked like an off-the-ball linebacker, we're going to move him to linebacker and see how that goes. Like, just stop messing with guys when they do something pretty well. And Zaven Collins, like, rookie year, was really good against the run. His run fits were excellent. He was able to attack guards and backs and blockers with the correct technique and make some plays. And okay, he hasn't necessarily kicked on, but I'd be pretty concerned about putting him on the edge and expecting him to be an impact player there.
Yeah, the couple of 2022 second and third round picks, Cameron Thomas, Myjai Sanders, those are the both third round picks, sorry. Those are the guys I would be looking to there. Let's just touch on Isaiah Simmons really quickly. You know, he comes in, he came out of Clemson. He looked like the player, the Chargers. Kind of similar to the player number three on the Chargers, who could play anywhere. Hasn't really been the case. Simmons struggled early as an off-the-ball linebacker, but he was just fascinating because he had a long, lean linebacker type of body, but played true free safety at times at Clemson, and made free safety types of plays. And now last year he found a home in the slot in Arizona. He's a pretty good blitzer. That's why going to Wink Martindale and the Giants, intriguing for Simmons, who's there's a difference between being just an explosive blitzer and a pass rusher who's going to go, win against tackles. Simmons is a good blitzer going to a blitz-heavy scheme. Intriguing there. But Simmons did a nice job in the slot last year. This year they had been trying him back at free safety. I think coming out, we thought he was more of a Cam Chancellor strong safety. Not a heavy hitter like that necessarily, but that you want to play him in the box, but not give him full linebacker responsibility. We'll see what happens. But either way, they tried a bunch of stuff in Arizona. Didn't really work out. They get a 2024 7th-round pick for Simmons. And I just wonder if that'll open the door for more trades and Arizona just continuing to turn over this roster.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see. I mean, wrong division, but I'm curious what the Giants do with him. Like what Wink Martindale's plan is for him. I mean, look, a 7th-round pick suggests it might not be much. You
don't need a specific. It's just like bring this talented dude in here and see what we can do with him.
7th-round pick. It's like let's just roll the dice and see what I can do with this athlete. But if they do have a specific plan, I mean, the Giants theoretically have 2 starting safeties already, so there might not be a spot for him there. Their bigger weakness, I think, is at linebacker. Maybe you want to put him in the slot and give him that kind of Kyle Hamilton role from Baltimore, where he plays that sort of safety slot hybrid that's starting to exist more and more in the NFL. But I think from his Arizona career, you should be taking the lesson that this guy was a defensive back, albeit a college version where the roles aren't necessarily the same. Was bad at linebacker and then started to look better when you moved him back to defensive back. So that feels like that's where his future should be.
All right, let's go through the cornerback room here quickly. And last year this was an issue too. Arizona, let's not forget, 2020 it was, right? Where they were undefeated up until 21. Undefeated up until week 8. Right.
They were the last undefeated team that year, right?
Yeah. And they have just slowly fallen apart since then. And even that year, it felt like they kind of overachieved in the secondary. And other than Budda Baker, they continued to not really replenish the secondary. Keitrell Clark, as a rookie, maybe slated to start there opposite Marco Wilson.
Yeah.
Bobby Price, Christian Matthew, Garrett Williams is a rookie that's coming off an injury from Syracuse. But you don't have, do any of our listeners know any of those players? Not that that's the standard, but unproven is the story of the Arizona Cardinals on both sides of the ball, mostly on defense this year, though. So,
could you just dragging our listeners like that?
No, our listeners know. Our listeners know all those guys. They know Keitrell Clark. He just got drafted out of Louisville, right? So they all know that. Marco Wilson, former Gator. Go Gators.
Garrett Williams not properly back yet with his injury.
No, not yet.
He was the higher draft pick, but
Yeah.
is starting behind the 8 ball because of the injury.
So the intrigue for the Cardinals, I think, is watching the youth. I do love that. Watch the young players. Who's a part of the rebuild? When does Kyler Murray come back this year? But by all accounts, it looks like an odd time to have a rebuilding year because Kyler Murray's, right in the prime of his career.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have already said, well, this is the team that should be picking number 1 overall next year. We'll see. Jonathan Gannon's the new head coach, too. We don't know if he's this guy that's just going to sneak a few wins there because he'll be a good coach like Brian Daboll was with the Giants. But by all accounts, it looks like the Cardinals are probably going to be drafting high next year. And
they have Houston's pick.
And they have Houston's pick, so they're rooting against the Texans all year. And so it'll be interesting for Arizona just to see the youth movement, but I'm not expecting a lot of wins. So
No, and it's strange because it is really a year, like a free year. They're not expected to win. They're expected to be bad. They have draft picks, extra draft picks next year in Houston, in Houston's, and then their own, which will be high. They don't have any reason to do well this year. So it's an interesting year where you might as well throw a guy like Clayton Tune out there for however many games it's going to be, and see what he has. Because if he has nothing, cool. All it did is move you closer to the number 1 overall pick anyway. And then I'm also really intrigued to see how soon Kyler Murray does get back on the field, because it's a different sports, but we're in this world right now where there's a spate of really, really fast like ACL recoveries. A guy, the South African rugby captain, right? World Cup's about to start. Dude, this man got back on the field 119 days after tearing his ACL.
Wow.
He did April the 22nd, and he played a game last week. And there's a couple of those recently. Like Kyler Murray, I think we all assumed because he got injured so late.
That's a good anecdote. That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Murray, I think, because we all assumed, he got injured so late in the season, and the Cardinals are expected to be bad. He might not get back at all, right? We might not even see him this year. I mean, he might be back in like late September. He might only miss a few games.
Well, that changes the projection. Over-under's 4.5 for the Arizona Cardinals. Where would you land on that?
It's pretty hard to get under 4.5.
17-game schedule.
Yeah.
Reminder.
So let's go over that.
We're going to go over on everything again?
No, just this one to start with.
I'll just go under just to mix it up here, because I do think Arizona will get the number 1 overall pick. But yeah, if Kyler Murray comes back, or if Clayton Tune balls out, that could throw a wrench in things.
Remember the great Jerry Rice once recovered from an ACL in season. He tore his ACL week 1 and was back for the playoffs, I think.
It's ridiculous. How do you do that?
I mean, you're Jerry Rice.
Shohei Ohtani tore his UCL. Very sad.
He was back for the final game of the season, so he did it within the 16 games.
You're over there on new technology. Well, Jerry had that 20 years ago.
97.
Yeah.
That was the old Jerry. 97.
Over 20 years ago.
It wasn't even like fresh, 20s youthful Jerry. That was old and busted Jerry, at least, 15 years away from the end of his career.
Falco?
This
season,
I would like to
I didn't say
myself.
Delete that from the
comments.
record. I'm not going to accuse Ray Lewis and Jerry Rice in the same calendar year. Thank you. This season, DraftKings has launched the largest best ball tournament in DraftKings history. Right now, you can enter into DraftKings Best Ball Tournament for a shot at over $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes. Make your entry into the draft today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the NFL season without having to worry about managing your roster, waiver wires, or anything else. To start playing best ball, download the DraftKings app using code PFF. Enter DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest and snake draft your team for the season. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from all your top scorers. No ads, no drops, no trades, no I should have played him instead. Teams with the most points by the end of the season, they'll have a shot to take home the $1 million top prize. So what are you waiting for? Head to the DraftKings app and sign up with code PFF to start playing best ball today. Join the DraftKings $10 million best ball tournament only on DraftKings with code PFF. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void or prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. Just .com. Los Angeles Rams. What a fascinating team. I know I say fascinating and interesting a lot, but there's a lot of intrigue here. I thought 2 years ago, one of the most intriguing stories was Matthew Stafford in Los Angeles, not St. Louis, with the Rams. And they go and win the Super Bowl. Now, there's still some intrigue around the Rams because it's Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, and friends. And the friends are very, very young.
Yeah.
It's all rookies. So it's like a little different from what we just described in Arizona. Is it on paper a rebuilding year for the Rams? Absolutely. But they don't have their starting quarterback injured. We actually have, by all reports, a fresh Matthew Stafford, maybe the healthiest Matthew Stafford in years, including the Super Bowl year where he was very good in 2021. And so you've got these stars, Stafford, Kupp, Aaron Donald. In like the defensive depth chart, it looks like you dropped Aaron Donald on the Senior Bowl team. That's just what it looks like. That's just the reality. There's a couple other guys there, but it's, again, unknowns. I'm not saying these guys won't be good, but I've never seen a team so reliant on first and second year players like the Rams. So they're going to, if they're going to compete in a weak NFC, it's stars and scrubs at an extreme level here for the Rams.
I mean, the defenses for both the Rams and the Cardinals are incredible. Like, you put those on paper next to each other, and these two defenses exist at the same time in the same division. Like, those are two of the worst-looking defenses you're ever going to see on paper. Only one of them has Aaron Donald on it as well. But yeah, it's an insane team of youth. There, they've added. It looked even worse. I mean, they've added Akello Witherspoon and John Johnson back.
Yeah, they sprinkled in some vets there for sure.
But like, you don't have to go back far before those two guys weren't on the team either, and it looks even more barren and bereft of talent. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating season to see how much impact Aaron Donald can individually make, because there's nobody taking attention away from him. Remember, like in years past, it's been, okay, this is a reasonable defense. You got Aaron Donald now. How well can a guy like Dante Fowler play, because Aaron Donald is going to be taking all the attention and giving him all the cleanup pressures? I mean, there's nobody that's looking like who is the Dante Fowler in this defense right now? Michael Hoyt, the rookie, Byron Young. It's like, maybe, but it's a total shot in the dark. Who's going to be that guy?
Yeah, so let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Stafford back, and then what happened last year? We saw it right from week one. They go up against the Bills. The Rams are defending Super Bowl champs. They get the home game to kick off the season, and the Bills they just have Stafford under pressure the entire night, and that may have been the pinnacle of their offensive line play last year. It continued to get worse. A lot of it was injury-related. So this year, look, they got to stay healthy, first of all, but even if they do, who's proven on that offensive line? Rob Havenstein at right tackle. That's it as far as proven. Steve Avila comes in as a second-round pick, probably slated to start at left guard. Joe Noteboom, he showed flashes down the stretch in 21, gets paid before the 22 season, gets beat up against good rushers, and then gets hurt. And this year they've been moving him from left tackle to right guard in camp, moving him around. So even left tackle is a big question mark, if it's Noteboom, if it's Alaric Jackson. So, look, the O-line could be better because we're assuming they won't have as many injuries as they did last year, but it also doesn't mean that these guys will get the job done because, again, it's young and players who haven't done it at the NFL level.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think the Rams and the Cardinals are very similar in terms of roster construction right now. Both defenses look absolutely bereft of talent. Only the Rams have Donald. But the offenses are, I think, fairly similarly constructed as well, except the quarterback is healthy for the Rams. But you look at it's the same thing as we were saying about Arizona, which is the receiving core is intriguing because you have Cooper Kupp, you've got Tyler Higbee, you've got some talent there, some proven talent, and then you've got more unproven sort of long shot bit pieces like Tutu Atwell, Van Jefferson, Ben Skoranek, who's moonlights at fullback, and all the stuff they do with him. The backfield is a little bit less impressive for the Rams than it is for Arizona. But then the big concern or question mark is on the offensive line, which for the Rams has proven during the Sean McVay era to be a massively influential driver when determining how good the offense is going to be. When the offensive line has been strong, this looks like the best offense in the NFL. When it even goes to average, it becomes problematic looking. And when it looks bad, this offense doesn't function anymore. And right now, on paper, this line looks bad.
Yeah, so that's going to be the interesting part, I think, for the Rams. If Cooper Kupp is back and healthy with Stafford, they had such an incredible connection throughout that entire 21 season. I expect the production there. See if the Rams get anything out of Tutu Atwell. The great Puka Nacua turning heads.
The great.
As a rookie. So I think he'll get plenty of opportunities. And then the defensive side of the ball, like we said, it's Aaron Donald and company. Ernest Jones has stepped up. He was a really nice addition during the Super Bowl run as a third-round rookie. So he's like the veteran of the back seven here. As you mentioned, John Johnson comes back. Interesting career for John Johnson, who had 3 out of 4 really productive years for the Rams, just never really panned out with the Browns, but he comes back. Jordan Fuller is now a veteran. It's a lot of 3rd and 4th year players are now called the veterans here for the Rams. But I'm intrigued where all of these rookies fit in. Byron Young is an edge rusher who you mentioned. Nick Hampton, a guy that we liked coming out. Kobe Turner, who I really wanted to see this preseason, kind of struggled a little bit, hit the ground running out of Wake Forest. I want to see where these young players all fit in here, but I think there's going to be some growing pains for the Rams.
Yeah.
The other thing I mentioned in the preseason recap, when you have so many young players and it's so tough to rep special teams, let me touch on special teams really quick.
You noted special teams
teams enthusiast here. Could see some special teams breakdowns. Punt coverage, kick coverage. Again, when you're building a team, just trying to figure out what you have and which young players are in there. I mean, that's going to be a challenge for them. Just keeping special teams in order from a coverage team perspective. So that's just something else to keep an eye on. Trey Tomlinson, we've loved in the draft process and during the preseason here. We mentioned on last show or 2 shows ago, small guy, outside corner at TCU, has a slot body type, but he's played outside for the Rams, so it'll be intriguing to see what he does. The other corners that they've drafted the last couple of years, Robert Rochelle, Kobe Durant, they've been in and out of the lineup, contributed here and there. They were just athletic prospects from small schools. Be interesting to see their development. So, I mean, if you're like into the draft and player development and everything, the Rams are fun to watch. If you're just every week saying, hey, is this team going to win the Super Bowl? I'm not seeing it. But if you're into the player development aspect, some fascinating prospects to watch for the Rams.
It's a really fun team because they have almost nobody there to keep rookies off the field. And they had a ton of draft picks. They did the same thing they always do, which is trade away the important picks and then pick an absolute ton in the draft. So they ended up coming away with an absolute boatload of rookies. And I loved a lot of the players they brought in this year. I mean, I remember I was texting Zach during the draft being like, you got another guy I love, like listing them all. So, when you look at some of the rookies that they've got, I mean, presumably Stetson Bennett isn't going to play a quarterback, but, Puka Nacua, who you've been talking about, Byron Young, one edge rusher, Nick Hampton, another edge rusher, the Trey Tomlinson, who we talked about at cornerback, Kobe Turner on the defensive line. Like, they have a ton of players that are probably going to play quite a lot. And if multiple of those guys ends up showing something right away, those are the kinds of drafts that can change the course of franchises, only typically it's with more design and higher draft picks. But if they're able to do it simply because there's nobody there to stop these guys from being on the field, and they hit on 3 or 4 of those guys, that does change things.
It's the complete opposite feeling in most Rams seasons, though, where the last few years they were in go-for-it mode and were trading for Von Miller in the middle of the year. Even last year, when the Rams were not that good, by the trade deadline, they were still ready to fork over a couple first-rounders for Brian Burns from Carolina. That is in their DNA to go for it right now. And now this year, the story around the Rams is, let's see how these young players are. And if they're good, wait till they're in years 2 and 3, and maybe it is a full rebuild with the Rams with a couple of stars around it.
It's also worth pointing out that, we've said this for other teams. When you have to rely on a large volume of young players, the median outcome there is bad. So as much as I like a lot of the rookies that they drafted, and I'm therefore sounding more optimistic about the outlook, the chances are most of those players are going to stink, because that's just the reality of mid to low round draft picks in the NFL. But maybe they do buck the odds, and 3 or 4 of those guys, as opposed to 1, say, ends up showing well, in which case that is a potentially transformative draft.
Do you think there's a chance, let's wrap it up with this, if things don't go well for the Rams? Because, look, with so many question marks on the roster, it's going to be a challenge for Stafford and Kupp and Donald for the stars to carry this squad. Does Aaron Donald get traded at some point?
I don't. So that's going to come down to what does Aaron Donald want? Like, Aaron Donald is
he's been teasing retirement.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right?
But if he's sitting there and the Rams are 2 and 4, 2 and 5, and trade deadline's coming up, and Donald can go to
team should be on
Buffalo
the phone.
or whatever.
Yeah, team should be on the phone, but it's a case of like if Donald is a 1-year rental, probably not. If a team thinks they can get 3 more years out of Aaron Donald, sure, why not?
I think the 1-year rental might be interesting.
I'm also interested, by the
Donald.
way, in just what he's going to do this year. Like, people were writing him off after last year, the first injury the guy's ever had in the NFL, and a season that didn't look like Aaron Donald generally. In terms of statistically, I think he still looked like Aaron Donald when you go and actually look at the tape and watch the games, but statistically, for the first time, he didn't look like Aaron Donald. And it coincided with Chris Jones getting as close to Aaron Donald as anybody since J.J. Watt in terms of performance and production. So now, he was, 11th on the NFL players list of top 100 players in the league?
Yeah, the players are stupid sometimes.
Cool.
There's no way any guard voted for him at 11.
I would hope
or
not.
Lower.
Right. I would hope that nobody that actually has to block Aaron Donald put him anywhere near 11. Anyway, point being, sure, at 32 and first injury, you start to look for signs of decline. Having said that, it wouldn't shock me if Donald came back this year and just got back to being Aaron Donald, which is the single most destructive player in the NFL over the last 10 years.
All right, over-under for the Rams is 6.5. Where are you going, Sam?
Under. I think this offensive line is going to be a train wreck, at which point the offense will be a train wreck.
Yeah, Stafford going to stay healthy the whole year. I'll say under.
General manager Stafford?
GM Stafford. Yeah, he was the GM of your hotel.
Matthew Stafford is apparently the general manager of the Home 2 Suites in Nashville. So he's getting a head start.
The Matthew Stafford.
Getting a head start on the post-playing career.
Almost certainly has to be the Matthew Stafford.
Why wouldn't it be?
All right, next up, San Francisco 49ers. Currently in the news.
Yeah.
Trey Lance has been demoted
as
to QB3.
Predicted.
As predicted, as expected.
Nailed
Trey
it.
Lance is now QB3, and the Niners are exploring all options.
Yeah. I feel sorry for Trey Lance. He's currently on pace to go down as a colossal draft bust. And it's not really his fault, period, let alone for a backup or a number 3. So you're sort of left wondering, how does this guy get better? And the only way for him to get better is to play. And this is the situation that the Colts are dealing with Anthony Richardson. He needs to be on the field. You can't sit him for a year because he needs to see defenses. He needs to see rotating coverages. He needs to see the way NFL teams can disguise things. He needs to see that because he hasn't yet because he's so inexperienced. Richardson's going to get that shot. He was drafted high. There's no real threat to his gig. Lance got hurt. He was supposed to get that shot last year, and then he got hurt and he got Wally pipped by Brock Purdy. And now he's trapped in a world where there's no pathway to that playing time because the 49ers can't give it to him because he doesn't look good. And no one else is going to give it to him because he doesn't look good. So he's trapped in this hideous catch-22 where the only way he's going to get better is by playing, but he looks so bad right now that nobody can play him.
Should have stayed in school, huh?
I mean, you can definitely make that argument. He was in the same recruiting class as DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
I know, you go viral with all your tweets.
What's his name? Tanner Mordecai?
Tanner Mordecai, yeah.
Who's still in college.
Wisconsin legend.
Yeah.
Just transferred to Wisconsin.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, is there any team that makes sense here? I know Vikings fans have been talking a lot about Trey Lance this offseason. Does he go to a team like the Ravens where he backs up Lamar Jackson? Does he go to a team like the Eagles where he could back up Jalen Hurts?
The problem is, I don't know how many teams even want him as the backup at the moment. How many teams can you think of where Trey Lance would be the primary backup right now?
Yeah, and look, this is a tricky one too. I think I mentioned it on the ride back. We always talk about Kyle Shanahan as this cheat code and everything, and that's for a lot of quarterbacks. I don't think it means that if Kyle Shanahan couldn't get the most out of Trey Lance, that he's doomed elsewhere. I think there was, pass game wise, there was probably not a fit there. And every time I mentioned Kyle Shanahan and Trey Lance, I thought, okay, the key here is going to be the run game. And I don't think we ever really got to see that in full effect. Or even Kyle Shanahan want to fully dedicate to that around, Trey Lance is going to run the ball 12 to 15 times a game, and then the pass game will become easier. Lance just wasn't good in Shanahan's system Doesn't mean he can't be good in other systems, but you're right.
Also,
to answer your question, I don't know anywhere around the league where people are raising their hand like, I need Trey Lance as my backup right now.
Also doesn't mean that he wouldn't have gotten better in Shanahan's offense, had he made it through all last season and gone through a year. Like, if he'd played all of last season. We don't see the reps,
you're right.
If he'd played all of last season without getting hurt, he would have doubled his career dropbacks, essentially, more or less, whatever. Like, he would have literally doubled his experience with a full starting season last season for San Francisco. So, that's the kind of difference in experience. But you start listing teams where it would sort of make some sense for him to go, like Minnesota. Would they want him as their primary back over Nick Mullins? Maybe. The Giants I've seen kicked around because Daniel Jones, we don't quite know what he is yet. Like, Tyrod Taylor is their backup. Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback right now than Trey Lance. Atlanta, Taylor Heineke is a better backup quarterback right now. Washington, in case Sam Howell stinks.
Jacoby Brissett
is a better backup quarterback. Justin Fields in Chicago. PJ Walker is probably a better. All of these guys, you're saying, well, not only do you need a team where the starter either might be on shaky ground or could get hurt, you also need one of those teams where the backup stinks. New England, maybe. Bailey Zappi. Okay, Bailey Zappi's a better backup than him right now, I think. But if Mac Jones gets hurt or pulled, I can see a world where Bailey Zappi plays himself to the bench after 4 games. That's the kind of scenario Trey Lance needs to get any kind of playing time.
Well, I think Trey Lance was always drafted with he's got a good arm, big-time throw ability, and he can run. Was a project from an accuracy standpoint. His accuracy was well below the standard of every other quarterback in that draft class. Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones. Accuracy was always a tick below those guys, and he just never hasn't developed yet, and he hasn't really had the opportunity. So I think it's an intriguing buy low for some of those teams that you mentioned just to see. It is a 49ers preview, so we need to focus on them.
You know what he really needs, tragically?
What?
He needs a year or 2.
The XFL.
Or in the USFL or the XFL. That's genuinely what he needs. Go play at one of these leagues for a year or 2 and double, triple your starting experience, your throwing experience, and then re-sign for somebody and come back and try and do it again.
Just because the reps aren't there.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not that crazy, although we were sitting here a couple weeks ago saying, should we give him every rep in the preseason behind a second-tier offensive line? And
right.
That's the world of the USFL and XFL.
Yeah, sort of, except it's also against those people as well.
No, I get it. I understand. So the Niners are going to have they're rolling with Brock Purdy.
Yep. And
Sam Darnold's the backup. Purdy's coming off the elbow injury. He should be good to go. He's been playing a little bit in the preseason. Last year, 13-4, projected at 8.8 wins here. Purdy, I posted some stats the other day just for perspective. High 70s grade last year. He was good, but the production was off the charts, right? It's always, second or third in EPA per play, second in yards per attempt. We always give the credit to Kyle Shanahan and those playmakers. I think that's fair because there's a history of the Matt Schaubs of the world, Matt Ryan going to MVP, Jimmy Garoppolo having some of the best stats of all time. And, I think that's Shanahan. But Purdy added that little extra element last year, made a few plays outside of structure. It was like Jimmy G plus. He still threw the ball to the defense and got away with it at times. But Purdy was kind of Jimmy G plus last year. And if you get that again, the Niners might be going to the NFC Championship again.
Yeah, he did clearly add value on top of the Shanahan offense, which is critical. At the moment, Trey Lance is sort of undermining and actually taking value away from the Shanahan offense. Purdy was taking what was there, which is the number one thing for a Shanahan quarterback. And then he was adding some plays that weren't there before with those extended plays, with those late in the down plays. And those simply aren't on the table anymore for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, if they ever were. And that's where he starts to improve on a guy like Garoppolo. If you look for his entire career, including the preseason, the postseason, everything, for Brock Purdy, on plays where he was pressured, he's got 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's able to make these plays that weren't being made, which is why the stats, or part of the reason the stats look so much better than his overall performance. So there's definitely value to what he was bringing, but we were getting, some of the narrative was getting out of control because the stats look so amazing. So I think he should be the right guy for them going forward. I think it's the correct decision to give it to Purdy rather than go back to Trey Lance, given what we saw. But now we need to understand, where is this going to settle into? Like, what is our baseline going to be for him? Because the sample size is small, and it was amazing, right away.
Either way, he might be surrounded by the best group of playmakers in the NFL. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. I mean, as a starting point, can it get any better than that? And not only that, but players who could do multiple things. We saw once Christian McCaffrey came over, hey, formationally, good luck with this. Deebo Samuel can line up at running back. Christian McCaffrey can line up at receiver. We're moving people around. We got Juszczyk over there, too, who can line up all over the place. The most versatile fullback in the league, out of 4 of them.
How dare you?
But
Patrick Ricard is a fullback, offensive lineman, defensive
Ricard's running mesh over there for the Ravens. So these are Ayuk has been fantastic. He looks like he's coming into his own. Maybe even has wide receiver 1 potential for another team, and he might be the third target here for the Niners. And say what you want about Brock Purdy and his ascent. It did kind of coincide with Christian McCaffrey coming over to the Niners, for whatever that's worth, as a running back. So they got the playmakers, man, and the best left tackle in the NFL in Trent Williams.
There's always confounding factors.
Always confounding factors.
Yeah,
but look, that's the starting point for the Niners. And I think the only question is going to be on that offensive line, particularly the right side, where you lose Mike McGlinchey and you've got a few more question marks up front maybe than they had last year.
Yeah, there's a few teams in the NFL where you look at it and you say, the skill position players are great. The offensive line looks like it could undermine the whole thing. I mean, isn't that the story for several teams this year? But yeah, Trent Williams.
Shanahan's, sorry to interrupt. I'm interrupting you a lot today. I apologize. But Shanahan, I think, has done well. He elevates the line too.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's an offensive system that makes everything better. It makes the receivers better, it makes the quarterback better, it makes the offensive line better, or at least look better. And Trent Williams is still the best left tackle in the NFL, one of the best offensive linemen of all time. So that's huge. But he's 1/5 of an offensive line that now looks like it has a theoretical weakness at least 1 or 2 spots, and the rest of them don't have a particularly high standard rate of play. So this might be the worst offensive line I can think of in a Shanahan offense for a long time. And maybe all of the other factors are enough to, drag it up, to raise the level, raise the tide of that offensive line. But for the first time, I think in a long time, you look at that and you say, that has the potential to derail this offense in a way that it doesn't usually.
Colton McKivitz is in year 4 to step in at right tackle here. 446 career snaps. It doesn't mean he can't do it. I mean, he was okay in 71 snaps last year in limited time. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but these are question marks. I think I know that Mike McGlinchey got tossed by Micah Parsons one time on a rep. I don't know, that's bad. That was a bad rep.
Yeah.
Mike McGlinchey was a good right tackle.
Bad rep.
Excellent run blocker and a solid pass rusher. He's a good player. You're losing a couple good players up front, or there's turnover up front. Still don't really know what you get from Aaron Banks. But on paper, it's you know what you're getting from Trent Williams, elite play. The other 4 spots are not great on that O-line. So, yeah, that is one thing that could potentially derail it. But, again, Shanahan, a master of blocking angles, winning the box count up front in the run game, and setting these guys up for success, relying on play action to mitigate pass blocking concerns. So overall, it might be a wash, but if there's something to watch for the Niners offense, it's going to be the O-line. Defensively, Nick Bosa, still waiting for that big deal. But they've got stars, man. They've got stars, and they bring in Javon Hargrave, one of the biggest free agent signings this offseason.
Yeah.
The Niners have had, when they've been good and they've been making these NFC championship runs, it started with that defensive line. I thought Travarius Ward at corner last year was a great addition. But you've got stars up front, Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Fred Warner at linebacker. You've got Ward in the back end at corner. Talanoa Hufanga was fantastic at safety last year, so they got playmakers at every level for the Niners.
Yeah, that defensive line looks nasty. I mean, Nick Bosa obviously is a defensive player of the year type candidate. Javon Hargrave has been one of the best interior pass rushers in the NFL over the last few years. And if you rewind beyond that, kind of go back to his Pittsburgh days, he started off as more of a run defender. Like, he can do that as well. Maybe he can't do them both at the same time, but he can be either of those guys if you need him to be. I would imagine he has the ability to be either guy as opposed to he's just coincidentally transformed. Eric Armstead, obviously a really imposing player as well. And then you've got guys like Drake Jackson, who I loved coming out of the draft as a sort of situational speed rusher. Cleveland Ferrell, who obviously was a disappointment as a top pick in Las Vegas for the Raiders, but isn't a bad player. Like he didn't justify his draft spot, but he's become one of these guys who is probably completely overlooked now because he's seen of as a draft bust, as a failure, but is actually a solid NFL player. So a guy to add to this defensive line, I think that's a sneaky good move. And then, yes, beyond that, Fred Warner, star at linebacker, Hufanga, potentially a star at safety. This should be a good defense again.
Drake Greenlaw was fantastic last year. That pairing of Greenlaw and Warner is probably the best in the league. They use Warner in different ways and trust him running the seam like other teams can't do with their middle linebacker. So lots of like with the Niners. The big question, I think, is that last year the question was always the cornerback spot opposite Charvarius Ward, who had a really good season. They had injuries last year. We saw Lenore fill in and have a pretty good little playoff run, but he was not good leading up to that. So it's Ambry Thomas probably trying to slot in opposite Charvarius Ward. So every team's going to have new players in some unprovens. For the Niners, it's a couple spots on the offensive line. It's a spot or two in the secondary, depending on how they settle in the nickel situation and everything. That's pretty much it. It's a little bit of turnover for a team that almost every year Kyle Shanahan has had a healthy quarterback or Brock Purdy. They've made the NFC Championship. Yeah. So expectations are high again for the Niners. What's the over-under for the Niners? Let's find it. 10.5.
Ooh.
Now, you get 4 games against the Rams, who Shanahan's owned, 2 against the Rams and 2 against the Cardinals. 4 games against those 2 teams.
Which is the team? Isn't the Cardinals the team that's owned the 49ers, though? In this weird Russian roulette.
Oh, yeah, it's a weird
rock, paper, scissors.
That might not work this division. Time. Cliff's gone, though. Does that change things?
True. Yeah. I think there are more cracks in this team than people are talking about. Like, we're just sort of penciling back in the same NFC Championship game as last year. Everybody in their preview, it's going to be Eagles, 49ers again. I feel like there are more cracks to this team than that, but I still think they win more than 10.5 games.
I'll take the over. I'll say, too, the feeling I get with the Niners, and maybe I just downplayed it a little bit and said, there's just a few spots where there's turnover. It feels like when the Cowboys last year, where I thought they were a very good team, the baseline was already high, but I think they got a little bit worse than the previous year. I think the Niners, top to bottom, might be a little bit worse than they were last year. But they're still really good. The baseline, you're coming from, they're the second best team in the NFC.
Yes.
So if they come down a little bit, they still could be the second best team in the NFC. That's okay.
Can I give you some crazy dates? I dug it up, the Jerry Rice thing, the ACL recovery.
Oh, jeez. No, I'm trying to stay on point here.
We've already lost the point. It's important. These are historic numbers. So we're talking about how quickly can Kyler Murray recover from his ACL. I referenced Sia Khaleesi, the South African captain, got back on the field 119 days after tearing his ACL. Jerry Rice, in 1997, tore his ACL and MCL in week 1 and was back on the field 106 days later.
How?
I don't know. Well, look, it didn't work out that great because he caught a touchdown and tore his patella or snapped his patella or something like in the same game. So he got back literally for that game and then was done. But 106 days, the man got back on the field.
And then he played, 8 more years in the league?
Yeah.
What was his last year, 05?
Something like that, yeah. Or Jerry Rice.
Seahawks legend, Jerry Rice.
Yeah, 05. The Denver Broncos, Jerry.
Broncos?
Preseason, I think. I don't think he even was on the team for the regular season. But
was he on Seattle's Super Bowl team? Wasn't he on their Super Bowl team?
04 was Seattle.
04 was Seattle, okay. So he wasn't on the 05 Super Bowl team.
No.
All right, we're going to move on to the Seattle Seahawks. But first, our next partner is AG1, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. Yeah, that's right. Sam and I, we drink it every single day because how else are you going to get all your nutrients? That's what we do, right? You drink it and get everything you need to kick off the day, Sam. Tell us about AG1.
Well, God knows you're not getting the nutrients from our other diet elsewhere.
Stop making fun of my diet, man.
You are. It was collective. Having witnessed, our trip to Nashville, our collective diet was rough. So
if you get your nutrients from AG1, then you can eat all the barbecue you want, like we did.
Exactly. Yeah. Start of the day, crank it in the water, get the good stuff down you, and then barbecue for lunch.
Perfect. Everybody can relate to that. So all great athletes have one thing in common. They take care of their bodies. Huge part of that starts with optimizing whole body health. A lot of them drink AG1. That's why I'm a huge fan. If it's good for athletes and former athletes like me, it's good for you. With every daily serving, we're just setting ourselves up for success with 75 high-quality ingredients that, give us all the key daily nutrients to support energy, focus, strength, and clarity. It's the micro habits that deliver the macro habits and helps just about everybody take care of their health every single day. Also love that it costs just less than $3 a day. Pretty good deal, if you ask me. It's a really good, effective daily habit. It's a win-win, good price, good results. If a comprehensive solution is what you need for your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/PFF. That's drinkag1.com/PFF. Go check it out right now. All right, Seattle Seahawks are on deck as we wrap up the NFC West. Geno Smith, coming off of his breakout season last year, Seattle, made a little run, made it to the playoffs. They lose to the Niners in the wild card round, but you got Geno Smith coming back. They had I don't want to say legendary, but an elite rookie class last year. You found 2 starting tackles, potentially elite corner in Tariq Woolen, a good running back in Ken Walker. And on paper, it looks like maybe this draft class is going to be just as good. 9-8 last year, projected for 8.2 wins. What are your thoughts on Seattle heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strong team. A lot of it is going to depend, can they continue? Like, was that rookie class as good as it looked, or is it going to take a step back? Did we just see sort of impressive debut performances, and actually that's not necessarily who they're going to be going forward? Or do they kick on and become even stronger looking? I mean, Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas, the 2 tackles they had last year, they played very well out of the gate, and it started to tail off the longer the year went. Their range of outcomes, I think, is pretty wide this year. They could be problematic at some point, or they could take a big step forward and actually look like 2 of the better tackles in the NFL. So, and Tariq Woolen is a similar kind of idea, right? Incredible right out of the gates, built a lot more than Sauce Gardner on the sort of volatile splash plays, interceptions, those kinds of things. So, given Tariq Woolen's extremely young at playing cornerback, is he going to take a huge step forward and start looking like a true all-pro this year? Or do the splash plays regress a little bit and you end up with something a lot less impressive than we saw last season? So I think a lot of it is going to come down to what these young players look like in year 2 and beyond, and this rookie class, can they have the same kind of impact? But if all or most of that hits, this is a really good-looking team.
It shows how wrong we can be on these previews sometimes, Sam. But last year at this time, Seattle had just traded Russell Wilson. They were given the job to Geno Smith. He was actually battling Drew Lock for the job.
It looked like they were basically punting on the season, like giving up on this year. Geno's the guy. All right,
you have two rookie tackles, right? Yeah. The same thing, right? Because we didn't know what they were going to do right away. It looked like maybe what we were just talking about with the Rams or the Cardinals. It looked like a rebuilding year. And all of a sudden, it was a playoff push because Geno Smith was fantastic, and that rookie class was awesome.
It looked a lot like the Cardinals, where you're talking about next year. This season is just, let's waste some time. We'll have a high draft pick, and we'll go again, only without the quarterback. Like Arizona, at least theoretically, has Kyler Murray as the future at that position. The Seahawks didn't even have that. It's like they traded away Kyler Murray, and we're rolling into this year with some combination of Clayton Tune or Colt McCoy. That was what it looked like. And then Geno Smith looks like a top 10 quarterback out of nowhere, and the rookie class was playing extremely well, and some of the players that they had already on the roster were playing well as well. Yeah, it can be – that's one of the most sort of shocking deviations from expectation that you can think of in a year.
So now you're looking at a team. I want to talk about Geno in a minute here, but I always start with QB and pass catchers. This group of pass catchers with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I think for years here in Seattle, those have been the guys. And then it's like a little tight end production, even when Russ was there, right? A little tight end production, revolving door at wide receiver 3. But they go and spend a first-round pick on Jackson Smith and Jigba, who might be the best wide receiver 3 in the league right off the bat, and an awesome compliment to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Smith and Jigba does have a wrist injury that I think week 1 might be in jeopardy, but let's just pretend he's going to be healthy this season. I think insurance for those top 2, but also Smith and Jigba work in the slot where he's just a smooth route runner, knows how to get open. Some legitimate playmakers here for Geno Smith. And look, as good as Geno was last year, and there was a point where he was graded early as a top 5 quarterback, and then he just kind of dropped off, landed around 10 or 12, whatever it was. He's probably still just a mid-tier quarterback. That's what you are. That's not a knock. But mid-tier quarterbacks with this group of receivers in a solid offensive line, they can produce. So Seattle's set up to have a really productive pass game.
Yeah, Geno's season was very strange. He had 3 single-game grades that were above 91. So 91.3 against the Saints. That's 10.7 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions.
He was out of his mind against the Saints.
Yeah. 91.5 against the Giants. 92.4 against the Lions. That's another 10.7 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Those are like passer rating of 130-plus type games. So he had 3 of those. His debut on the season against Denver was an 84.5, and then nothing else was good. The next 2 highest games are 72 and 73. And from that week 9 onwards, it was average at best towards below average. Now, again, we said earlier, there's always confounding factors. That coincided with the offensive line playing a lot worse in the second half of the season than it did at the start of the season. But there are a few instances where you can look at a guy, the overall picture with Geno was, wow, that was really surprising, and he was a top 10 quarterback. There's very few instances where you sort of look at it and go, okay, but that's kind of built off 3 games, 3-4 games. That's his season. Everything else was the same Geno we've always seen. So I think there's a real live question as to what exactly he's going to look like this year. Because big picture, we saw a lot of the old Geno, and then we saw another one of these wildly volatile quarterbacks who had one of the highest big-time throw rates in the NFL, had a ton of those, was the best deep ball thrower in the NFL, ironically taken over from Russell Wilson, who was the best deep ball thrower in the NFL, but also had 29 turnover-worthy plays, led the league in turnover-worthy plays, up there with Josh Allen. So what are we going to get this year from Geno? I think is a very valid and unknown question right now.
When we have our conversations, the dialogue around Geno Smith is the same dialogue you have around the mid-tier quarterback. Again, I use that as a just descriptor. It's not a knock, but it's a guy that will have high-end games, will have bad games. He had a game with 4 turnover-worthy plays last year, a game with 3, a game with 5, and then another game with 3 once again in Week 18 with the season on the line, and they still ended up winning and getting to the playoffs. So I don't know what you're going to get. I do think we had a Seattle fan ask, basically saying, I'm arguing with my friend, and my friend says the interceptions are the only thing that matter. He only had 9 interceptions last season. That's what matters, not turnover-worthy plays, some made-up stat. And, the question was basically should we buy into this? And I said, yes, you should buy into turnover-worthy plays because it does matter if you keep throwing the ball to a linebacker and it drops. Turnover-worthy plays are more consistent year to year than interceptions are year to year. So I do expect some turnover regression there on the negative side for Geno Smith. I don't think he was great at taking care of the ball last year. He had the second most turnover-worthy plays in the NFL last season, and a lot of the ones he got away with were in the red zone. Now, the other part of this conversation, let me say, that was his first full year as a starter in 7 years, right? So on the positive end, he was a little better at improving his sack rate, still took 50 sacks or so, but he was a little better at some of the things that I thought he struggled with way back when he was playing with the Jets. Big time throws, as you mentioned, he was special in that area, getting the ball down the field. That throw against the Saints was out of this world into triple coverage, and it was pinpoint. And the other thing about Geno, when he did hit some lulls, he did bounce back. I loved his ability. Right when you were ready to say, the wheels are falling off, now we're regressing back into Geno Smith, who's a career backup. He never fully regressed into that. He regressed a little bit, but he was still a solid NFL starter. And I think at the baseline, you're getting an average to above average NFL starter with maybe a little bit higher end potential in there as well.
Yeah, the baseline was higher, even though some of the numbers look the same as like early Geno, right? Like, so 4.2% was his turnover-worthy play rate last year. That was also his turnover-worthy play rate in 2014, his last like full year starting for the Jets, his second year in the NFL. Exactly the same percentage. 5.6% was his big-time throw rate last year. His rookie year, it was 5. So those numbers are not a million miles away from each other across the board, but last year he averaged, a full half yard more per attempt. His PFF grade was higher by, 15 points. So the baseline, the throw-to-throw level, he was making more plays. He was being more efficient. He was better than he was earlier in the season. But it's just that it was so concentrated on like 3 or 4 games of insane performance. And it's like, you can't sort of say, well, what if you just take those games away? Because they happened, and what if you took the 3 best games from every quarterback out? You're torpedoing everybody's grade. But it's rare that you get a season built so heavily on, 3 or 4 games. And because they all took place in the first half of the season, that sort of sets the narrative. Like, the expectations on Geno were minimal going into the season. So at the halfway point of the year, fully 50% of his games had been outstanding, Yes. So now that's completely flipped expectations. We've gone from, he's probably going to be average at best going forward, to actually at the halfway point of the year, half of his games look like Patrick Mahomes, and he's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And then you sort of, once you've set that expectation, it's quite easy to not notice that the next 8 games were not that good at all. And, so I do think that he's in a very strange spot now where he did look better across the board than anything we saw from him previously in his NFL career. Having said that, I still think that the range of outcomes for him this year are pretty wide.
All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. The multi-year issue in Seattle has been the pass rush. Last year, 28th best pass rush grade for the Seahawks. They've made a few changes this offseason. They've drafted a ton of young edge defenders. Boye Mafe in 2022. You get Derek Hall coming in. Darrell Taylor had a pretty nice season. Uchenna Nwosu's coming back. Bobby Wagner rejoining the Seahawks here. Mm-hmm. Bobby Wagner comes back, not to necessarily fix the pass rush, but pass rush is the big question. They bring on Draymond Jones. He's their big money free agent signing to help with the pass rush. It looks like it should be better. If you get a little bit of development from the youth, you get Draymond Jones in there, who's a better pass rusher than a run defender. And then maybe Jamal Adams coming back and making plays. Intriguing secondary, because Tariq Woolen, who had one of the freakiest combines you'll ever see, size, length, movement skills, 4.2 something speed, looks like a 3-year developmental project, and boom, he's one of the best rookie corners we've seen over the last couple of years. Woolen was fantastic. Can he keep it up? You mentioned that earlier. Draft Devin Witherspoon at number 5 overall. Michael Jackson, big long corner. They've got an intriguing group in the secondary. This might be the best Seattle defense we've seen in a few years.
Yeah, Boye Mafe is having a very strong preseason after not particularly impressing last year, but again was a guy a lot of people liked, and it doesn't always happen year one for young players coming into the NFL. So Boye Mafe will be interesting to watch this year if he can really kick on and become the player that people thought they were drafting. Yeah, there's definitely talent in this defense. There's no reason this group can't be a very good group.
So turnover at the linebacker group, they were below average last year. The pass rush I think should be a little bit better. I think Seattle too. Remember when they had the Legion of Boom and Russell Wilson, they had this stretch of incredible drafting, and it looked like, wow, how are they ever going to slow down? Who's going to slow down Seattle? You have young Russell Wilson, you've got this secondary, but they had a 4 or 5 year stretch where they just did not replenish the roster through the draft. And it always goes back to, can you be really good at just picking players? Can you be the best in the league at picking players? And I think Seattle's a good example of, they've had some highs, they've had some lows through the years. They're back up on the upswing. What they brought in the 22 class and all those contributors, and now maybe in this 23 class when you see Devin Witherspoon and Jackson Smith and Jigba and what they're capable of, Zach Charbonnet at running back. I'm really high on Seattle. Feeling good about the Seahawks right now. With all my questions with Geno Smith, I think I'm just impressed with the infrastructure that's been created, the roster there compared to what it looked like a year ago, and their group of unknowns becoming, intriguing second-year talent. So I'm feeling good about the Seahawks.
again, vaguely similar to the other two teams we've talked about in the division, in that the offensive line looks like a potential weakness or a potential issue. Really strong skill position players. But the big difference is like their defense is light years ahead of, the other teams where they had weaknesses there. Like Arizona's, the Rams, their defense is so much better. It's closer to the 49ers in that regard than it is those other two teams, which I think is a large reason why they're closer to the 49ers than the other two teams.
All right, over-under's 9.5, man. What are you going to do with 9.5?
I'm going to go under 9.5 and say just 9.
I think I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go over. I think the totality of Geno Smith's season, I'll lean toward the positive end, the roster, like I said, and then the fact that the division, the weaker division. We're going to go there. All right, it's off to the AFC West. It means the Denver Broncos are up next. Russell Wilson, former Seahawk. So Broncos are here. Sean Payton's in town. Russ coming off of a disappointing season, to say the least.
Changes abound.
Yeah. The Broncos go from a team for a few years where it's like, hey, the roster's good, just get him a quarterback. And they go through all these different quarterbacks, and it's Teddy Bridgewater, and they tried Joe Flacco one year. Didn't they try Flacco? Did I make that up?
Did Flacco play for the Broncos?
Did I make that up? I'm losing my mind here. Is that 2018?
I've deleted late era Flacco from my
The
memory.
Broncos have been having the revolving door of quarterbacks.
He did.
Yeah.
2019.
19, yeah. Russell Wilson was going to be the guy to save it all.
I'd like memory hold that as a thing.
That's good. That was when you said you're Joe Flacco.
Yeah,
that was
right.
when he was a Bronco.
That's when it was.
Yeah. But yeah, can Sean Payton get Russell Wilson back on track here? After the quote, rough quote, one of the worst coaching performances in history.
For the paraphrase.
For Sean Payton.
Yeah. Bad.
5-12 last year. They're projected at 8.6 this season.
Catastrophe last year. It basically can't be as bad as it was last year. The question is, how much better can it get, or how big an impact can Sean Payton make? And he seems to be taking the approach of, let's just change everything, on the basis of most of it is probably right. I don't really know what the correct answer is, but I know that what happened last year was about as wrong as it can possibly get. So if I take the exact opposite approach to everything that happened last year, I'm probably in the right direction. So things like banning bucket hats. Well, they loved bucket hats last year, so I'm going to ban them this year. That's probably the right way to go.
He banned How would you get into camp? What happened?
Can't have bucket hats. Can't have them.
Why?
Can't have that. Because they had him last year and things were bad, so we got to ban him this year. He had this whole thing about, when you're done with your preseason game, here are the things you can't do on the sideline. No bucket hats, no whatever. There's a whole list of things. And then there's a picture of Garrett Wilson with all 5 of the things that he banned, on the sideline for the Jets. And it's like, yeah. I mean, I get what you're trying to do, Let's just not do last year. But
interesting.
In themselves, these rules might be foolish. But I don't know that's the wrong approach, right? It's to just exactly opposite of what happened last year, and we're probably in the right direction. The Wilson thing, we may never see the old version of Russell Wilson, but the gap between that and what we saw last year is so huge that there's a middle course to be charted, and the middle course is probably still quite a good player. And that, I think, is the real key.
Yeah, Let's start with Russ and getting him back on track. Clearly his worst season last year, but his multi-year sample is really interesting as well, right? You go back 4 or 5 years, those years we can't remember anymore. You go back 4 or 5 years and we said, look, Russ is a top 8 quarterback. For 3 or 4 games a year, he's going to look like one of the best quarterbacks in the league. For 3 or 4 games a year, he's going to have just a dud, just a terrible game. He still might lead a fourth quarter comeback and You're going to win with 12 points or something. But that's kind of Russell Wilson. But then he has this stretch, 2019 and into 20, where it's like, man, is he up among the elites? Yeah, you still don't know if you want to just let him cook and throw 40, 45 times a year, but, when he's play action, throw the ball down the field, Russell Wilson looks incredible. Middle of 2020, there was a drop-off. 2021, injures his finger, and he's got some issues when he comes back from the finger. Is it the injury? Is it regression? But there was a stretch of play from 20 into 21 where Russell Wilson was in the 20s when you're ranking quarterbacks by PFF grade. And again, confounding factors, right? Is it the finger injury? What is it?
Yeah.
And it actually proved to be kind of predictive of his 2022? Maybe. I mean, like the results looked like, yeah, that's what you are. You're in the 20s. You're not good anymore. But it did coincide with Nathaniel Hackett and everything else that was going on there in Denver. So now I think the question is, can Peyton help Russ just creep back toward average? Can he just get him back to middle of the pack?
Well, there's two things. There's like, can he get like last year's offense just wasn't even viable. It didn't work. It didn't function. There was that horrific game that everybody was forced to sit through. It was a disaster. So there's, let's just not be that. And that's probably his starting goal. And then there's, okay, what Russell Wilson was truly great at for most of his career is the exact thing that NFL defenses have been focusing on over the last few years and trying to take off the table. This move and this development towards the Vic Fangio type of defense, split safeties, cover 2, cover 4, cover 6, all this kind of stuff has been about trying to take away explosive plays, big vertical chunk plays that change the dynamic of a drive and of the game. And that's what Russell Wilson was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at. He was incredible at creating those plays, at taking advantage of those plays when they were there. And when you look at that initial beginning of his decline, some of those, the worst games he had were against Brandon Staley and the Rams, where he just ran into that defense and couldn't figure out what to do with the ball. He tried to play the same thing he'd been playing for years and just take shots that were no longer there. And the Rams defense would just capitalize and pick the ball off. So Sean Payton needs to, one, get viable play, and then two, either try and create a system that somehow manufactures those plays anyway, or figures out how to turn Russell Wilson into a different quarterback than he's been ever before and get him to the same level, knowing that what he was great at is a much smaller part of an offense today than it used to be.
Now, let's go. There were some injuries last year. Cortland Sutton wasn't around for the season. Tim Patrick was lost early last season. He's gone again for this year. We got Cortland Sutton back. Jerry Jeudy had a bit of a connection with Russell Wilson down the stretch last year. And Jeudy had a bit of a breakout last year as a guy that, compared to his peers, right, wasn't as good as we expected maybe coming out. But Jeudy still has a ton of potential as a route runner. We got Marvin Sims in the mix. The great Marvin Mims in the mix. The great Marvin Mims. This should look better. Greg Dulcich can run the seam a little bit at tight end. Should be a better group of playmakers. And then the offensive line was kind of hit or miss. And that was like the first thing that Sean Payton did when he got in there. He said, we're going to get Ben Powers from the Ravens. We're going to get Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers. Garrett Bowles coming back off of injury. I think 3 out of 5 at least look solid. Quinn Miners, 4 out of 5 really look solid for Denver. So I think, just Russell Wilson aside, I do think the supporting cast will be better right off the bat. Samaje Perine comes in as a pass-catching running back. Javonte Williams coming off his injury. But just to finish up the Russ question, part of it was, what's his skill set as a quarterback? Are you putting too much on his plate? Did Pete Carroll just know how to manage Russell Wilson? And the reason why you never put too much on his plate is because they knew you couldn't do that. That's one part of the equation. The other part was there actual physical decline with Russell Wilson? He did look a little bit slower. He did look less dynamic. He was letting the rush get to him like he always did, and he was not breaking free from it. Was there physical decline with Russell Wilson, or is it just a skill set fit type of thing?
Looked a little bit chunky.
Now we find out he's lost weight.
Yeah, 15 pounds apparently. That's a lot of weight.
Yeah. So there's intrigue there.
He does look visibly, slimmer than he was a year ago. Now, that would raise some immediate questions to me. He's one of these guys who's famously paying, like $1 million a year for body maintenance to people, like keep him in tip-top condition and make sure my career lasts as long as humanly possible. Like, what the hell were those people doing while he was packing on 15 pounds apparently of useless weight that he could lose this offseason to get back in shape? Like, what's your refund policy here? Because apparently you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing.
He's doing dynamic warm-up on the plane.
Yeah. But anyway, the point being, if that is a thing, that now he's lost 15 pounds and is closer to the player he used to be in terms of movement and athleticism and escapability and all those kinds of things. Those are still a big part of his game theoretically, right? Being able to run around behind the line of scrimmage, manipulate defenses, and exploit gaps and space that wasn't there when the play started. Like, that was what he always did in Seattle. And then what he took advantage of was like a deep bomb down the sideline once he maneuvered that space around. Even now, if the deep bomb isn't there, he can still find something different, but he needs that level of mobility to be able to do that. If that's back, that is a potentially difference-making thing from last year.
The last time we saw Sean Payton, 2021 with the Saints, it was his first year without Drew Brees with the Saints since 2006. They go 9-8. You've got a little bit of Jameis Winston. It looked like he had gotten Jameis Winston's career, at least, pointed back in the right direction. They had Trevor Siemian for 4 starts. They had Taysom Hill in and out of the lineup. And when every time Drew Brees got hurt, Sean Payton won games. 5-0 with Teddy Bridgewater. So he's got this small history, of still pretty much winning games, even without the Hall of Fame quarterback. It's small, but that's what they're expecting here is, okay, Sean Payton has found a way to win. Even when Drew Brees wasn't there. We're not going to get Drew Brees type of performance from Russell Wilson, presumably. So he should be able to elevate this team and make it much better offensively.
And he got the job in the first place before Drew Brees was a factor. I mean, he has a history of getting good play out of quarterbacks that weren't Drew Brees before Drew Brees got there, which is relevant. When like his list of QBs before Drew Brees wasn't great either. So,
all right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Surtain, is he going by Pat? Pat Surtain? Two. Putting himself in the elite cornerback conversation last year. The defense was a little hit or miss last year. They were so good for years with Vic Fangio there, but they just never had the offensive side of the ball. The defense was more of they were a question mark at times last year. Remember that they would have good games and be mad at the offense for not scoring, but the defense had some cracks last year compared to what they were in previous years. What are you expecting on the defensive side of the ball?
I think their defense will be good. There's so much talent there. It probably underachieved a year ago as well. It just didn't get as much notice because of the offense. But that group of pass rushers, I think, should be a lot better than it was a year ago. They've added some size and stoutness, resilience up the middle as well. They brought back, some important players, guys like Josie Jewell at linebacker, and a guy like Patrick Surtain has the potential to be as good as any corner in the NFL. I don't think he's quite there yet. I think Sauce was better last year, but he's basically as good as it gets at the cornerback position, and that's a huge, advantage to be able to deploy.
Using last year's PFF WAR as a baseline, some of the additions there are having an Alex Singleton in there, Josie Jewell, who you mentioned, those are above average players. Zach Allen was coming off a career year. They paid him in free agency from the Cardinals. He was an above average player last year. Those are just good, solid additions. Frank Clark comes in to complement Randy Gregory. I still think Nick Bonito has a role as a designated pass rusher. We saw Baron Browning, show some flashes last year when he was thrown into an edge rusher role. So, yeah, I think it'll be solid on the defensive side. Justin Simmons, we'll see what else he has left, but they look solid, man. I think they'll be better.
Yeah.
And look, the coaching situation last year, it wasn't just Russ in the offense, right? It started right from the get-go. They didn't, they were kicking field goals on 4th and 5 from 79 yards or whatever it was. I mean, there were some issues early on last year. It got a little bit better. There were some adjustments made, but clearly it looked like Nathaniel Hackett wasn't ready for the gig, and it's tough to fully gauge what was this 5-win season for the Broncos, because they were a solid team for many years. Solid team, and it was a similar roster. I think they get back to at least that 8-9 win type of status, right?
Yeah, I mean, the narrative when they acquired Russell Wilson right away was Denver has the capacity to challenge Kansas City and be a true Super Bowl contender. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but most of the pieces that are in place for that to be the narrative are still there. And maybe the change in outlook for Russell Wilson has changed the ceiling of where that can be, but I think the baseline is still this should be a good team. Like, they should be a playoff team.
Over-under's 8.5 for Denver.
Of course, yeah, so they should be a playoff team. The problem is so should the entire AFC, and somebody's not going to be. And they're in a division with Kansas City and the Chargers. 8.5. I will go under and say they're 8 and 9.
8. Oh, man. I don't love it because of the division and the AFC. I think I'll go under. I think Sean Payton will do well, though. Right?
Yeah.
I think Sean Payton will do well. I could be wrong on this one. I'll just say under because I got to say something. Who the heck's next? Got 3 more teams to discuss here. I get the Super Bowl champs are up next. Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs coming off a Super Bowl win. Again, the narrative last year at this time was you lose Tyreek Hill, maybe you're taking a step back to take a step forward, but they leaped forward to that championship last year, win the Super Bowl. It was an intriguing year because Patrick Mahomes answered a lot of questions about how's he going to handle the league adjusting to him. Perfectly fine. The offense was as good as ever. The defense put a whole bunch of young players out there who held their own. So 13-4, projected to win 11.4 games. They're the favorite to win again. The multi-year view of the Chiefs are they've been the best team these last few years. The question is, when you look at last year, it's not pure dominance from start to finish. Sometimes just because they won, you think, well, of course the Chiefs won. We all knew the Chiefs were going to win. It wasn't like that throughout the season. They lost a big one to Buffalo. They were a couple. They won. The game-winning plays were penalties by the Bengals to put them into field goal range. Penalty against the Eagles in the Super Bowl. It's a fine line between us saying, well, the Chiefs disappointed again. They didn't win a Super Bowl. And, of course, they won. They're the favorite. But all that said, they're the favorite. The receiving core looks like on paper, if Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid weren't there, you're not saying, hey, this is one of the best receiving cores in the NFL. But when you look at those skill sets and the different route runners and yak ability and you put them into this offense, it's an intriguing group of receivers. Mahomes continues to get better and adjust back to the league and everything. So, yeah, that's why the Chiefs are the favorites again.
Yeah. I mean, the story on the Chiefs isn't going to change as long as the key architects of this whole thing remain intact, which is Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelce, I guess, to probably a slightly lesser degree. But as long as those 3 guys are there, the Chiefs are going to go into any season as one of the favorites for winning the Super Bowl. Mahomes is showing how special he truly is. He had a kind of legacy enhancing, burnishing performance in the playoffs last season with that ankle injury, which
while injured,
was bad. I mean, that would have kept most quarterbacks out of the game. And he went out there and didn't just play on the injury. Guys would have done that. There were players out there that would gut it out, would go out there, would play on the injury, and would look like crap, And it's like, it's probably still the best they can do, so why not? You got to let him try and give it a go. Mahomes played well without being able to move around. Like, he literally didn't look like a bad quarterback. It looked good whilst basically not being able to move. You look at that quarterback documentary, and one of the first things that's happening is Andy Reid sitting there next to him on the sideline, running through the playbook going, can you do that? And he's like, yep. Could you do this? Like, he's trying to figure out what's on the table. Like, how much of the offense have I got to throw out because you can't move? And Mahomes is basically saying, keep going. It's all good. I'll figure it out. And he did. So, he is genuinely insane. And we're in this world now where you're getting backlash right now. The longer we go, now everybody's sick of people praising Mahomes, so we've got to fight back against it, like the Brady stuff, right? We've had too many years of praising Brady, so now it's time to say Brady sucks. We've had too many years now of people saying Mahomes is insane, everything he does is crazy. So now you got to fight back. Everything, why are you constantly riding Mahomes? Why can't you just let it go? Like, well, because of things like that, right? That's one of the most insane runs in NFL history, and he just did it. So it's important to point out how crazy he is. But he's there. Reid's still there. Travis Kelce is still there. Therefore, the Chiefs are great.
And, that group of playmakers that I talked about, they bring in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, use him as a deep threat. He's good as a deep threat. Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, Richie James. It's almost like whoever you choose there is probably going to, whoever you want to put in the slot to run those routes is probably going to get open and have a productive year. And so, I feel good about the offense. Think they're going to be fine. There's turnover at tackle. Donovan Smith comes in from the Bucs, and Jawan Taylor, big money free agent to take over at right tackle. Jawan Taylor's been a better pass blocker than run blocker. The intriguing thing there is I think because the Chiefs spread to run and everything, that it'll mitigate some of the run blocking problems that Jawan Taylor has had. Donovan Smith had a bit of a down year last year, but played through injury. I've heard some people say this is the best tackle tandem that Patrick Mahomes has had. I don't believe that to be the case. I think Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz were probably better, but it might be the best top to bottom line because the interior, Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, fantastic. And the Chiefs are coming off their 2 best pass block grades in the Mahomes era over the last 2 years. And so that's been a factor as well. When you mentioned his injury last year, the O-line, it was like they stepped up and they said, we're not going to forget pressure. We're not going to let anybody close to Mahomes. They locked it down against the Jags and, against the Bengals. They were incredible up front. And I think the tackles will be good enough. So again, I think the offense will be excellent once again. Big crazy prediction for me. Isaiah Pacheco running hard, and they're tough to defend because of all the different playmakers and Mahomes running the show.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what that wide receiver group is going to look like, but it almost doesn't matter. Like, we've seen what happens now when they move away from Tyreek Hill and they do it more by committee. And, it looks like Sky Moore is going to step in to be that Juju Smith-Schuster type of receiver this year. They seem to have confidence in him. And then behind him, you've got the sort of unknowns of, Rashee Rice, the rookie, Justin Ross, this incredibly talented but injury-cursed receiver in college who's been making noise every preseason. But the primary axis is Mahomes to Kelsey, and then the rest is just taking advantage of that.
Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. The big story here, of course, Chris Jones holding out, and actually said this week he might hold out all the way to game 8 or through 8 weeks of the season. He wants a big money deal. I've always said the Chiefs and their team building effort, just fun to keep an eye on through the years. You've got this 10-year contract for Mahomes. They just chose to trade Tyreek Hill and said, we will break them up. We will take one of the best deep threats in NFL history, and we're going to take 5 players in exchange for him because we're not going to spend our money there. But where the Chiefs choose to spend their money to complement Mahomes is going to be fascinating through the years. So there's a, little battle here with Chris Jones. They're spending $20 million a year for the right tackle, Jawan Taylor, but they don't necessarily want to pay Chris Jones, who's an absolute game wrecker when he's at his best, for a defense that's been, good, not great, under Spags.
Yeah, it's a difficult standoff to adjudicate because Chris Jones, I don't know if he wants more money than Aaron Donald or simply comparable money to Aaron Donald. But Chris Jones last year really has sort of bridged that gap between regular humans and Aaron Donald, right? If you look at basically any data point or any graph over the last, several years, Aaron Donald is always off on his own anomalous data point all by himself. There's the cluster of players, and then over here somewhere is Aaron Donald. Chris Jones may not have surpassed Donald, but has moved into that gap. Like, he's bridged the gap between the regular players and where Aaron Donald usually resides in these data points. So he can definitely construct an argument that says, hey, I should be the best paid interior defensive player in the league. I should be the best paid defender in the league. Having said that, if you're Kansas City, that's probably just not a point you want to go to for basically anybody. Like, we don't want anybody other than Mahomes, and he isn't, to be the best paid player at their position in the NFL. So I don't know how close they are in making that deal, or like what is reasonable for a guy like Chris Jones, who is basically as good as any defender in football right now.
The thing I've said this offseason about this Chiefs defensive line, I'm intrigued by the different body types. And remember, 2 years ago, they had an issue at edge defender, and Chris Jones was the best edge defender on the team, so they played him at edge early in the year. He's not a great edge, but he's a guy that when you put him out there every now and again for a mismatch, it works really well. That's what happened against the Bengals, and 3rd and long, game on the line. Hey, Chris Jones, go beat the right tackle because we have a mismatch there. That's what I'm intrigued about. When he's on the field, he's a mismatch creator. Now they add guys like Charles Omenihu, who's super long, different body type, Felix Nduke, Uzama in the first round, long, bendy body type, George Karlaftis as a power, more of a bull rush type of specialist off the edge. Intriguing group of body types up front for the Chiefs, and all of those guys can move around. But Chris Jones is kind of the key there, right? If you take him off of that defensive line, Charles Omenihu is a fine player. He's a nice player. But he's a much better player when he's your second or third best rusher and not Chris Jones, who's getting all the attention. So this is a big factor, I think, for the Chiefs and, getting Jones back up.
Chris
back
Jones,
on the field.
yeah. That defensive line goes from looking like a weak group to a strong group just by putting Chris Jones on it.
Yep.
And goes the other way, obviously, if he's not there. So it's huge. I mean, if he's in a way, it doesn't matter for them in terms of if he's back by week 8. It's like the Von Miller conversation, right? The important part is not the first 8 weeks of the season. It's the last 8 weeks and then the playoffs. So if you have him for that, that's the important part. And you kind of have to, because that's the point at which he starts to lose, accrued seasons and, things matter for him. But they obviously want to have him there long term, and that involves getting a deal done, which is seemingly reasonably far apart. But if he's there on that defensive line, it is a strong group. Without him, it's a pretty weak group. But the rest of this defense looks really talented as well. And this is not something you always say about Kansas City. You go back a couple of years and you're like, this roster isn't particularly good. It's just got Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek Hill on it. Now you're looking at it and you're saying, this just this defense. Forget the offense.
Well,
there's a lot of good players on it.
That was the decision that they made, right? When they said we're going to trade Tyreek Hill, we're going to bring 5 new players in, and say the sum of their parts will over time be more important than Tyreek Hill. So that's where a Trent McDuffie comes from in the secondary. They did a nice job with Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams as rookies last year at corner. They got the most out of 7th round in UDFAs. L'Jarius Sneed that they brought in a few years ago. Nick Bolton, Leo Chanel. They do have good, solid players.
Willie
in
Gay.
the back seven now.
Drew Tranquill was brought in free agency, and the dude is buried on the depth chart, and he's a solid linebacker in today's NFL. They have 4 linebackers that can all play to some degree, and not enough playing time for them to be on the field.
Justin Reed's out there. They lose one Thornhill, but yeah, it's a good, solid defense. And I think again, the MO during the Spags era is they've never been, when they had Bob Sutton there. Early 2018 with Mahomes, they were one of the worst defenses in the league. Spags he's not going to have one of the worst defenses in the league. They're probably not going to be a dominant defense, but they definitely have games where they're holding their own and keeping it just close enough for Mahomes to go work his magic late, and that's why they're tough to beat, man. So if Chris Jones is out there, I think this might be the best Chiefs defense in years.
Yeah.
Because it is solid across the board, and there is defensive line depth that did not exist a few years ago. That they've purposely invested there. So, anything negative to say about the Chiefs?
Anything negative to say about the Chiefs?
The only thing is, I think they look better this year. But again, it's tough, right? You still have to, you're not that much, but just because they won last year and say the Bills didn't win and the Bengals didn't win, they're not that much better than those teams, to the point where, the Chiefs are going to go 16-1, and that's clear as day. They could go 13-4 once again, and then one break of the ball here or there, they lose in the AFC Championship. Any of that stuff can happen, but I think the Chiefs look better equipped this year than they did last year when they won it. So
I said this coming out of that Netflix documentary. Remember, going into that game, Joe Burrow and the Bengals had beaten Kansas City 3 consecutive times, and if they had, and it took an idiot defensive penalty by Joseph Ossai pushing, was it Mahomes? Whoever he pushed out of bounds late, to give him 15 yards, let them win, let them kick the winning field goal, right? If that doesn't happen, so essentially one play, now they still had the ball, they could have done it anyway, but let's say for sake of the discussion, one play effectively flips that game back to, now it's 4 straight times, including in a championship game. The narrative is now Cincinnati owns Mahomes. Joe Burrow is better than Patrick Mahomes.
By a couple plays.
Right. By 1 or 2 plays, we've gone from the Chiefs are the prohibitive favorites every year, they win, blah, 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 to we're 2 plays away from the narrative being Cincinnati is the dominant AFC force right now, and Joe Burrow is better than Mahomes, and blah, blah. So, yeah, this team looks fantastic, and anytime you have that starting core, it's going to be the favorite or a favorite for the Super Bowl, for the championship game, etc. But the margin between the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals and now maybe other teams is incredibly fine.
Over-under for the Chiefs is 11.5.
Over.
Yeah, I will also take the over. All right, man, 2 more teams to discuss. How are we doing on time?
That's your department.
That's all right. Not bad. I haven't been timing it this time, but I think we're in the general vicinity this year.
In the ballpark.
This time. Las Vegas Raiders are next, and then the Chargers. Raiders, we've got Josh McDaniels heading into year 2. The Raiders set some NFL records last year for blowing 10-point leads. Not great.
That's not ideal.
Not ideal. Jimmy Garoppolo is in. They bench Derek Carr at the end of the season. He's off to the Saints. So it's Jimmy Garoppolo's team now for the Raiders.
I'm already on to Aiden O'Connell.
Maybe we're on to Aiden O'Connell. 6-11 last year in Josh McDaniels' first year with the Raiders, projected to win 7 this year. They were in an interesting spot last year at this time because it looked like a rebuilding effort. You've got a new GM, new coach, new everything, and they trade for Davante Adams. In a year where it's like, we really ready to compete? Well, they tried to compete. So Davante Adams is back. Jacoby Myers comes in free agency. You got Max Crosby on the defensive side of the ball, who's a star. Is that enough, though, for the Raiders to improve upon their 6-11 record here?
It might be because 6-11 is not a particularly difficult record to improve on, but it doesn't look great, particularly in this context of the division and the conference, the AFC generally, where everybody seems to be loading up and getting better and better and better, and somehow all of the teams look to be contenders, and then you have the Raiders, and it's like, we decided to move on from Derek Carr because Derek Carr doesn't do a lot of good against Mahomes and Burrow and Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence and blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay, that's an argument I can buy. I respect that. And the fix was Jimmy Garoppolo, or at least what they were left with when the music stopped and that was the only chair available. That's where you start looking at it and go, okay. Now, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, you can argue, does better in Josh McDaniels' system than Derek Carr, even if they're vaguely comparable players in terms of overall ability. But look, the skill position players are nice. I like that a lot. I think they've got a lot to work with, even trading away Darren Waller, who I personally would have kept. But the skill position players are nice. Offensive line was getting better last year. It's not in a bad spot. They've successfully achieved the creep back toward average mantra.
Yeah.
But Jimmy G is a thoroughly uninspiring quarterback to be leading your team in a murderer's row division and a conference where everybody's good, and the defense still looks bad.
I'm excited for more Jimmy G data points. More Jimmy G data points.
How many data points do you need before you're just like, all right, I've seen enough now. I don't need any more.
Because let's use win-loss record for a minute here.
Oh, okay.
He's 40-17 as a starter. Listen for a minute here. He's 40-17 as a starter.
Mm-hmm.
And other than when the time Brock Purdy took over, every other time Jimmy G got hurt, which was often, the stats were fine, right? We talk about Kyle Shanahan, the magician. It made Nick Mullins look great. He looked C.J. Beathard, great stats. But they never won with those guys. And I know those guys are backups and the whole thing. But they never won. Whenever Kyle Shanahan had his hand-picked quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, they made it to the NFC Championship. Every time. Or better. And then last year, Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt, and they still made it to the NFC Championship. But what I'm saying is they've won a lot of games. And the Jimmy Garoppolo stats are great. I trust PFF grades. I think the PFF grades tell the story better than the stats. But part of the story is you've got pretty good grade for Jimmy Garoppolo, ridiculous stats consistently through the years. Now he's going to go to a situation where the familiar offensive coordinator, Josh McDaniels, and he's got some dudes to throw to, starting with Davante Adams, Jacoby Myers, who's a good 2, draft Michael Mayer at tight end. You got Austin Hooper at tight end. So we might see good stats again. So the data point is Jimmy G actually a winner? He's been in an incredible situation, right? Because he's had Shanahan. He's had the Niners playmakers.
Mm-hmm.
He was 2-0 with New England. And when you look back at that New England team in 2016, one of the best teams the Patriots ever had. Like, once Brady came back, they lost one game and they won the Super Bowl. So Garoppolo's been in a great situation every single time. This is probably his worst situation, but offensively, it's not bad.
So if Jimmy G goes like 12-5 this year, you're like, see, he's just a winner.
Just a winner.
He proves the rule that actually QB wins is a stat.
I mean, I think I don't think QB wins are all noise. I mean, I don't think you, especially in small sample sizes, you're not like Mitch Trubisky was, 12-4 one year, therefore he was the best quarterback that year. I'm saying over time, I think they're telling more stories than they're not. But in Garoppolo's case, I'm with you, right? I've almost always chalked up his success to his supporting cast. And now we've got a different supporting cast, a different world, and we're just curious to see what that all looks like.
Okay. I believe I've seen enough of Jimmy G that I'm not thoroughly interested in more Jimmy G data points.
I am. I was interested in Nick Foles' data points when he went to Jacksonville. I was interested in it. But you got still Davante Adams, look. So here's the other weird one, right? Derek Carr had his lowest grade last year since his rookie season. Josh McDaniels, right? That's supposed to be his thing. Is it because McDaniels' system's too complicated? It's the adjustment. Did him and Carr just not get along well enough? Like, what was it? McDaniels at least has a guy that he's worked with in the past, has a history with Garoppolo. Is that going to help with the Raiders? Can that help them overachieve? Because here's what I think the offense will be good. I think the offense will be fine. Josh Jacobs, comes back and plays and is happy enough. He was the leading rusher last year. There were games where he, was their guy, actually carried them. Overtime, walk-offs and the whole thing. Davante Adams is still awesome. It's the defense that scares me. I mean, the whole back seven is questionable. So that's where I think they're going to be in trouble. The Raiders they've been looking for playmakers on defense for 12 years now, it seems. So that's the big question. I think the offense will be fine, though.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. I think that offensive line is better than it looks maybe on paper. I think it was heading in the right direction anyway. I mean, Jimmy G is not a bad quarterback, whatever about being out on needing more data points. He's fine. So, yeah, the offense should be good. The defense, though, does look like an issue. I mean, it's Max Crosby, who's great. Outside of Max Crosby, it's like, don't see too many other people that you're that interested in making a ton of plays. I mean, Marcus Peters is probably a solid pickup for them. Nate Hobbs back in the slot is a good thing for this defense. Jacorian Bennett, the rookie, I think, has a lot of potential. Like, his tape popped when you were watching Maryland and when you were looking for, the other corner at Maryland. Like, he actually looks like he could be a find for them. There's players that might surprise, but the overall collection is tough to see how that's going to be a good group.
I think the best bet for the Raiders as far as overachieving goes, you mentioned Max Crosby as the star. Chandler Jones coming off his worst season in a while. Can he kind of recapture some of his previous self? He's getting a little old now. He was drafted in 2012. Malcolm Kuntz has had a nice little preseason, but then they draft Tyree Wilson in the top 10. He's coming off the foot injury. Haven't seen him on the field yet. If all of the defensive linemen come together, maybe that masks some of the issues, in the back end. But again, I don't. It's an intriguing defensive line. I just don't think it's enough. I really look at this roster. I can't get out of my mind that John Gruden in his second year, right? When you're going through this rebuild process, Gruden in his second year is like, defense. We got to spend all of our time on defense. We don't have enough playmakers. We don't have enough players. And you're sitting here 4 years later, and it's even worse than it was back then. On paper, that's going to be a challenge. Going up against the Chargers, going up against the Chiefs, going up against Sean Payton and Russ. It's going to be tough on the defensive side unless a lot of players step up for the Raiders.
Yeah. No, I think,
including a Marcus Peters who
right.
Stays healthy late in his career and has one of those 6 or 7 interception seasons. That's what it's got to be.
It's tough to find a compelling reason that defense will be good, even outside of the looking at what its opposition is going to be within the division and the rest of their schedule.
Anything nice to say about the Raiders before we leave here?
We said it. Like, the skill position players are really good. I mean, Davante Adams is still as good as any receiver in the NFL. I'm not buying the idea that he's now in second place to Justin Jefferson. He's as good as it gets. Jacoby Myers was the poster child of being like a bad number one, but when he doesn't have to be that guy, when he can just be Jacoby Myers opposite Davante Adams, that's a really good receiver to have. Hunter Renfrow, is one of those cheat code type players from the slot in certain route situations. If they get Josh Jacobs back in the building, under contract, happy to go running back.
Trey Tucker is a trick play specialist.
Right. Like, I didn't love Michael Mayer as a prospect, but he should be able to make some noise at tight end right away. Austin Hooper's there just in case he can't. And I could be wrong. It's a good group. Like, that should be productive.
Yeah, that's right. I think that'll keep the Raiders in games. If Garoppolo stays healthy, or if Aiden O'Connell just takes over and becomes the next Tom Brady. That is also a possibility.
Right. If Aiden O'Connell shows back up in the regular season and continues to not have turnover when he plays, he might just be a great quarterback.
All right, over-under for the Raiders.
Under.
is 6.5.
6.5. That is quite a low figure.
Yeah.
How many did they win last year?
6-11 last year. One of which was the Jacoby Myers, Ramondre Stevenson lateral
ridiculous play.
That was one of their wins.
All right, let's stay under because the AFC got tougher and they didn't get better.
They do good. They do a good job at setting these over-unders here because I can see them as a 7-win team here.
It's almost like Vegas knows what they're doing.
It is.
The man in Vegas.
I'll say over. I don't remember what I've said for everyone else, but I'll say over for the Raiders. Definitely got to say over for the Chargers because they're up next, and it's another offseason. It's another year of optimism for the Los Angeles Chargers.
Every year.
They made it to the playoffs last year, lost to Jacksonville, blowing, what was the lead? 28?
It was 28?
Something like that. 24? It's a big lead in the playoffs. That was months ago. So bitter taste in their mouth. Brandon Staley heads into year 3. It looked like our friend Zach Robinson was very much in the mix to get the offensive coordinator job, and then Kellen Moore raised his hand and said, we're parting ways with the Dallas Cowboys. I'm available. Kellen Moore is going to take over as offensive coordinator for the Chargers. Yeah, they were 10-7 last year, projected at 9.7 wins this year. They draft Quentin Johnston in the first round to add another big-bodied weapon for Justin Herbert. Herbert last year played with broken ribs and had a good season again. Not as good as he was in 21, but had a very good season. Gets paid this offseason over $52 million per year for Herbert. So now we're in this world where you can't spend as freely. But going into last year, the Chargers were spending freely. They were bringing in J.C. Jackson as the top free agent. They were trading for Khalil Mack. Those guys are still back. But you've got this underperforming defense and Herbert heading into year 4 for the Chargers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the big discussion point for the Chargers heading into the season is Justin Herbert plus Kellen Moore. What does that create? And, of course, is there actually this mythical, theoretical extra percentage of Justin Herbert to be had in the first place? We've always kind of got the feeling that there was a little bit like Russell Wilson during his let Russ cook period in Seattle. But again, always confounding factors, right? It's complicated last year because the dude had his rib injury, torn cartilage, broken cartilage, whatever the hell it was. And that clearly impacted his play last season. And that this sort of long-standing, well, it's probably the coaches, not Justin Herbert. So what does this look like? Can Kellen Moore actually unlock the best version of Justin Herbert? And does that look like Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, like the very best quarterback in the NFL? Because if it does, I mean, that's the reason we say that Kansas City is the prohibitive favorite every year, because they have that guy. Mahomes is that guy every year. If Justin Herbert becomes that guy this year and really puts himself on that same plane, the hype for the Chargers that's there every offseason is absolutely legit.
Yeah, I hate repeating myself over and over, but you always have different listeners and stuff. So the Herbert question is the thing I'm wondering here. Across 2 different systems, bottom 5 average depth of target guy. We know he's got the big arm. We know he can flip the field. Special throws, highlight reels out of this world. But there's a lot of dink and dunk to Justin Herbert's game, and it's been true across 2 different systems. Kellen Moore's job is essentially to get that out of him, as you said. The other person's job is probably Quentin Johnston, right? Because we went into this offseason saying not only is Herbert more conservative on paper, right? A low turnover-worthy play guy, a low average depth of target guy, but also the Chargers are slow compared to the rest of the NFL. You bring in Quentin Johnston as a big, fast receiver to go with Mike Williams, who isn't really fast, but is a contested catch specialist. So he's a downfield threat, right? Keenan Allen, who's a underneath threat, middle of the field threat, intermediate threat, not that fast. So you're bringing in a different dynamic. And there's also been those injuries at receiver, and of course the injuries we said that Herbert was dealing with. So on paper, they have the pieces to attack every level of the field, to get more aggressiveness out of Justin Herbert, and say, look, maybe you're going to throw a few more picks here and there, but we're also going to have a few more 40 and 50-yard completions, and we're going to flip the field as you have the ability to do. And instead of 2 special throws a week, make it 3 or 4. And those are big. That's the difference between 3 or 7 points. And so that's what the Chargers are trying to do, and I think that's what they need to do. Lean into the aggressiveness. Let Herbert be special. couple of years ago, they did a great job overhauling the offensive line, getting that back into a good spot. So I think if you're in the Chargers front office and you're looking at, are we making the right moves year over year? I think they are. That's why we're always so excited about the Chargers every year. They're making the right moves. They're all looking good on paper. And they're continuing to do that. Again, I don't know if this is what gets them over the hump, if they're challenging the Chiefs for the division. I'm not sure they're there, but I think they're back in the playoffs. And if Herbert gets hot, as good a chance as anybody to just make a Super Bowl run.
Yeah. I mean, that offensive line should be very good. Rashawn Slater looks like one of the best left tackles in the league when he's healthy. Zion Johnson, a rookie from a year ago, had some ups and downs year one, but I think has the chops to play. Corey Linsley is still one of the best centers in the game when he's healthy. Jamari Sawyer impressed when he was playing left tackle a year ago. I think it might be a bumpy transition for him to go from left tackle to right guard, but we'll see how that goes. And then Trey Pipkins at right tackle is solid enough. That should be that sum of that offensive line should amount to one of the better offensive lines in the game, in addition to the dynamic of everything else with that offense and Justin Herbert and the skill position players. So should be one of the better offenses in the NFL.
All right, let's talk defense for a minute. This was supposed to be Brandon Staley's baby.
Yeah.
They haven't been. They were outstanding, the Rams, when under Brandon Staley. It was Vic Fangio tree, and we're doing different stuff up front with our defensive line to steal gaps in the running game. Haven't seen much of that with the Chargers, or at least not the success. And they've got the name recognition, right? We've got number 3, the safety player for the Chargers, who's awesome. We thought he was going to be a do-it-all player for Staley. He's been fine. He's battled his injuries, of course, as well. Bring in J.C. Jackson last year. Looked like a horrible scheme fit through a few weeks, then he's out for the season. We'll see if they can get J.C. Jackson back. The trade for Khalil Mack, and Mack has his worst season of his career. Joey Bosa is still there. Like the names on paper. They bring in Eric Kendricks this year, and he is, even though he's getting older, still a good zone linebacker, knows what he's doing. My question with the Chargers, first off, none of those guys have played to their potential. Not one. So like in 3 years with Brandon Staley, or 2 years with Brandon Staley, we haven't seen a career year from any of those guys. They all had better years elsewhere, somewhere else. That's a bit of a question for me. The other one is, early in the year, the run defense was atrocious. That has been a consistent, 10-year issue for the Chargers. And even though they tried to bring in defensive tackles last year to shore that up, it still wasn't great. And we know that the pass game is more important than the run game, but you can't give up 200 yards in a game. You just can't have those games where you just get run over. And there's been a few of those for the Chargers. Can they actually fix that this season?
Yeah, it's a really big year for Brandon Staley. I mean, obviously, he's going to be judged on wins and losses, but actually, he should be getting judged on that defense at the moment. We're in a world where offensive coordinators, offensive coaches are the ones, generally speaking, being hired quickly, immediately, as soon as they show anything. They're at the top of the head coaching searches, and everybody wants the head coaching mind. So if you're going to be a defensive guy, you're generally speaking hired off the back of the best defense in the NFL, which he was, the Rams, which is the same thing for Robert Saleh, came from San Francisco, D'Amico Ryans after following Saleh in San Francisco. If you're being hired you need to be hired coming out of the best defense in the NFL, and then you need to bring that with you, or some version of it. And right now he hasn't. I mean, that defense has been bad and hasn't shown any real signs of looking better. And unlike a lot of other situations where that happens, it's not a lack of talent. They've got good players, and they've added good players, and it still hasn't gotten any better. So if you're a defensive head coach, how do you justify that? And whether it's Brandon Staley or you want to pass the buck to his defensive coordinator who exists, it's not like a Kyle Shanahan thing where he's coach and coordinator officially. Derek Ansley is the defensive coordinator there. Somebody needs to fix that defense, because it can't be this bad if you're a defensive-minded coach. You need to actually show what you bring to the table, particularly for a scheme that is still in vogue. This is still the defense everybody wants to run. This is still the scheme that everybody is looking for, so that needs to get better this year.
The Khalil Mack issue, when they traded for him before last season, of course, I like big-name players. I think big-name players can be overrated a little bit in the NFL, but Mack seemed like he still could be very good. He was coming off an injury with the Bears. He was coming off his worst season. But his grades, 91, 92, 90, 90, 86, 92. He has a 73, dropped to 73 in 21, and that's when the Chargers traded for him. It looked like a buy low.
Right.
It didn't, sometimes you think, well, cliff, falling off, but he's in year 8. It shouldn't have been a cliff for Khalil Mack. Hopefully it's not, because, again, he replicated a similar performance last year, lowest grade of his career. That could be a big miss if that's what Khalil Mack is at this point of his career. But there's also a chance he gets back up to that level that he was previously, because Von Miller did that, right? There was a point in Von Miller's career where it looked like, he's hit the wall, and then he, bounced back up again with the Rams and with the Bills before he got hurt. But that's what the Chargers need, right? I think they need, we talked about stars and scrubs and what Staley had with the Rams and building his defense around Aaron Donald and around Jalen Ramsey. They're trying to build this defense around stars. Joey Bosa missed most of last season. You need Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, number 3. You need those guys to play like stars.
So that's the other element here, right, is in defense of Brandon Staley-ish. The Chargers have this ridiculous injury run, history, luck, whatever you want to call it. Like when we had Vic on the show talking about injuries, he made the point that in terms of number and frequency of injuries, the Chargers weren't actually that bad relative to other teams. They were middle of the pack somewhere. So not good, but average, let's say. The problem was the players that they were losing were all of their best players.
Right.
So Joey Bosa is now looking like an injury-prone player. Khalil Mack has developed into an injury-prone player, having been bulletproof earlier in his career. J.C. Jackson goes down, like their big free agent acquisition. Okay, fine, he was playing like garbage before that happened, but, big key player for them. The player, number 3, the safety, whose name we must not mention, consistently injury-prone for the first couple of years of his career. Mike Williams, constantly going down. Like, they're losing all of their best players to injury. That can't happen. Like, how do you expect to have a good defense or, a good unit of any description if all of your best players are the ones going down all the time? So that's the thing that somehow the Chargers need to get fixed. Either they need to discover what the hell is happening that our best players are constantly getting injured and fix that, right? Replacing the head of medicine and recovery and whatever the hell else, right? Finding what that is.
Bubble wrap your superstars.
Yeah, or simply hoping that bounces back in your favor at some point. Like if it's not a thing, right? If it's not, there's something wrong with the sports science element of this franchise and we are consistently screwing it up. If that isn't the case and they have simply been getting very unlucky for a very long period of time, at some point that comes back in the other direction, and when that happens, you bounce back in a huge way.
You need to tell your training staff, don't let Joey Bosa get hurt. It needs to be Stone Smart.
When these lines
Trey McKitty, they get hurt instead.
When these lines go into the red, that's the signal to take them off the field.
So, look, I'm excited about the Chargers again for the 15th straight year.
Yeah,
because the on-paper depth chart looks good. I think they continue to get incrementally better. And like I said, I think the front office has made the right moves. Let's see if this is the year where they could do a little bit more damage. The over-under for the Chargers, I believe it's 9.5. 9.5. Over. I'll never get burned by the Chargers.
No, never.
We're going over.
Why would that happen? I'll go over. All right, 10
there
wins.
we go.
I can see that.
Is that every team? At least on this show.
So soon?
At least on this show. That's all 8 teams. Is that 2 hours?
Yeah.
Look at that.
And a bit.
That's good. I expected we were going to be here till 1. We must have skimped on somebody. We apologize. I apologize if we skimped on your team.
We probably forgot the Titans again.
Did we forget someone? No, the Titans are next week. And since we just saw them in person, maybe we'll start with the Titans. Did I do that last year? I started with the Titans to make sure I didn't forget them.
Probably
did. Anyway, so that's the Chargers, and that's the West done. So we're 3/4 of the way through the league. 24 out of 32 teams. We'll preview the rest of the league on Monday. That's the AFC and the NFC South. But for now, you're going to email us if you have questions or if you have bets. Our bet show, I think Labor Day might be good.
We got to start teeing this up at the top. We can't bury it at the back end of the
Don't
show.
Don't forget your bets. We could also we could put it on Twitter.
We're 2 hours and 5 minutes into this.
Everybody's wide awake, full energy. People are waiting for the next hour of the show right now. We're going to start hour number 3 of the show. NFL podcast at pff.com. Give us your strongest takes and bets for the season. and maybe you can win a PFF Plus subscription. Don't forget, last year a lot of people offered some collateral. Coffee, other goodies.
Coffee is a very good way.
If you want to put something up, coffee is great. I'll drink all of it.
It's a very good way of ensuring that your bet is one that we take.
Correct. Yes, if you're going to put something up, we're more likely to take your bet, even if we don't believe it, because we have a chance to win.
Yeah.
So those are the rules. NFL podcast at pff.com. And hit the thumbs up on your way out and tell your friends. The PFF NFL podcast is in full force. Full force. I'm done. I've had enough.
See ya.
All right. See you Monday.